January 27, 1984. Television networks across America interrupted their regular programming with breaking news. Michael Jackson had been rushed to the hospital after his hair caught fire while filming a Pepsi commercial. The press described it as a tragic production accident. The public saw Michael waving from a stretcher and assumed the situation was under control. They were wrong. What happened that evening in Los Angeles did more than leave burns so deep they nearly reached his skull. It became the dividing line in the life of the king of pop. The fire that erupted in 1984 never truly went out. It marked the beginning of a terrifying chain of medical consequences that pushed an artist known for his disciplined lifestyle toward a dependence on powerful pain medication. Was it really nothing more than an unpredictable accident caused by a technical failure? Or was it the result of cold and reckless negligence within the entertainment industry? And did that fire unknowingly ignite the tragedy that would take Michael Jackson's life 25 years later? Michael Mania and the Historic Deal. By the end of 1983, Michael Jackson was no longer simply a successful singer. He had become a global phenomenon. Thriller had shattered sales records, while the music video for its title track completely changed the way the world experienced popular music. The press called it Michael Mania. His image had become an enormous money-making machine. Anything connected to Michael Jackson, from clothing and accessories to toys and collectibles, disappeared from store shelves almost instantly. The world could not get enough of him. Within the Jackson family, Michael's success created another opportunity. Following the brothers' celebrated reunion during the Motown 25 television special, Michael's father, Joseph Jackson, believed the moment had arrived to bring his sons together again for the Victory Project. The project would include a joint album and a massive concert tour. Its purpose was clear. The family intended to use the extraordinary attention surrounding Michael to generate profits for the entire Jackson family. Michael had little interest in the plan. He had his own ambitions and wanted to devote his full attention to a solo career that had reached an unprecedented level. The disagreement continued for weeks. Eventually, Michael's mother, Catherine, intervened. With gentle persuasion, she asked her son to put the family first. Michael finally gave in. He reluctantly agreed to participate in what he privately promised himself would be the final project he completed with his brothers. To bring such an enormous project to life, the Jackson family needed equally enormous financial support. Negotiations with potential sponsors began immediately. At the time, America was witnessing an intense battle for dominance between the two largest soft drink companies in the country, Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola had always held the stronger position. Pepsi needed something powerful enough to change the balance. They saw that opportunity in Michael Jackson. A historic agreement was quickly signed. Pepsi offered $5 million, making it the most expensive advertising contract ever signed at that time. In exchange, Michael and his brothers would appear in 2 commercials for the company. Everything seemed perfect, but the first signs of conflict appeared as soon as the original advertising concept was presented. Michael's artistic vision and the first day of filming. Pepsi executives arrived with a very straightforward idea. They wanted Michael to dance to a rewritten version of Billie Jean while holding a can of Pepsi and smiling directly into the camera. To the company, it was a standard advertising formula. To Michael, it was humiliating. Close friends from the entertainment industry, including Paul McCartney and Jane Fonda, agreed with him. They warned that singing and dancing while openly holding the product would reduce him to an ordinary salesman and cheapen the image of the king of pop. Michael firmly rejected the concept. He entered the meeting room and presented Pepsi executives with an ultimatum. His face could appear on screen for no more than 4 seconds during the entire commercial. No one understood the decision. Pepsi executives were confused. They had agreed to pay $5 million, yet the biggest star in the world was offering them only 4 seconds of his face. But Michael had his own reasoning. He wanted to create mystery. The camera would focus on his dancing shoes, his white glove, and the shadowy outline of his body. The less the audience saw of him, the more they would want to see. That decision finalized the commercial's creative direction. However, no one could have known that Michael's unusual demand to show his face for only 4 seconds would later feel like a warning. It was almost as though some part of him wanted to protect himself, as if he already felt uneasy about exposing himself to the power of such a massive corporate machine. Filming for the first commercial began on January 25, 1984. Everything went smoothly. The set was designed to resemble a lively city street. Child actor Alfonso Ribeiro appeared alongside Michael, matching his movements with a remarkable precision. There were no accidents and no visible tension. The final footage exceeded expectations and appeared to promise an enormously successful advertising campaign. The ease of that first day concealed the negligence that was beginning to form behind the scenes. 2 days later, that negligence would lead to disaster. The horrifying accident of January 27, 1984. The second day of filming took place at the Shrine Auditorium, a massive venue in Los Angeles. The scale of the production was completely different. The production team brought in 3,000 audience members to fill the seats. They wanted to recreate the intense atmosphere of a live Michael Jackson concert. The sequence had been carefully planned. Michael would stand at the top of a staircase. Fireworks would explode behind him, creating a dramatic silhouette. He would then descend the stairs, move into the stage lights, and begin dancing with his brothers. The cameras started rolling. The first take was completed, then the second, then the third. Michael performed every movement flawlessly. By the fifth take, the technical crew confirmed that they had captured everything they needed. The camera angles were perfect. The lighting, fireworks, and Michael's movements were synchronized down to the second. But director Bob Giraldi did not stop. He raised his hand and ordered one more take. Take 6. Michael returned to his starting position. The music began. The crowd erupted. He started performing the familiar choreography. As he waited for the fireworks to explode, he moved into position. This time, the pyrotechnics activated earlier than expected. The safe distance between Michael and the explosions disappeared. Burning sparks shot directly toward the top of his head. Michael's hair caught fire instantly, but he did not realize it. Completely absorbed in the music and the rhythm of his movements, he continued turning and dancing. The flames above his head grew larger and spread rapidly. A wave of shock moved through the audience of 3,000 people. From the front rows, the scene created a deadly illusion. Many audience members saw the flames and heard people screaming, but they believed it was part of the performance. They applauded and whistled, convinced that they were witnessing an extraordinary stage effect. Several seconds passed before the intense heat burned through Michael's skin. He finally understood what was happening. The pain struck him all at once. Michael rushed down the stairs in panic. He turned repeatedly, desperately trying to extinguish the flames with his hands. His screams for his brother Tito tore through the auditorium. Only then did the crew react. They ran onto the stage, forced Michael to the floor, and used everything available to put out the fire. When the flames were finally extinguished, the full extent of the damage became visible. The hair on the top of Michael's head was gone. His skin had been burned black. The outer layers of his scalp had been completely destroyed. Medical workers at the scene quickly identified second and third-degree burns. The wounds were so severe that nerves near the surface had been destroyed, leaving part of his skull exposed. Michael lay trembling on the cold stage floor in unbearable pain as the 3,000 people surrounding him descended into chaos. The media response and the legal decision. A medical stretcher was immediately brought onto the stage. Security officers cleared a path toward a rear exit. They wanted to move Michael out of the building as quietly as possible, avoiding the photographers waiting outside. But, despite the pain, Michael refused. He told the medical team to take him through the main entrance. The doors opened. Hundreds of camera flashes exploded around him. Michael lay on the stretcher with temporary bandages wrapped around his head. Instead of hiding his vulnerability, he raised one arm. His sparkling white glove waved calmly toward the crowd and the waiting reporters. The visual contrast of that moment was unforgettable. The public saw the proud and familiar white glove, but beneath it was a body trembling from pain and a scalp covered in severe burns. Michael used his own image to calm the public, placing the emotions of his audience above his own physical suffering. That night, he was transferred to the Brotman Burn Center. Inside the privacy of the hospital, powerful figures from the entertainment industry began moving behind the scenes. While Michael was still lying in a hospital bed, waiting for doctors to determine whether his skull had been damaged, a group of executives arrived. They made an offer. A blank check was placed on the table. Michael could write down any amount he wanted, as long as the evidence of negligence by the production team remained completely secret. At the same time, efforts began to remove evidence from the scene. The black sequin jacket Michael had been wearing when the fire began was taken away. It was secretly sealed and hidden as though it were evidence in a classified investigation. The public would never see that jacket displayed in a museum or music exhibition anywhere in the world. Michael quickly learned what had caused the accident. Negligence by director Bob Giraldi, combined with technical failures, had permanently damaged his body. Michael was furious. At first, he decided to sue Pepsi and pursue the case as far as possible. He wanted to release the complete footage of his head catching fire so the entire world could see the brutality of the production process. But Joseph Jackson and the family's legal team quickly intervened. They analyzed the consequences with the cold logic of business professionals. Releasing the horrifying footage would permanently connect Michael's image to the tragedy. Instead of remembering him as a brilliant performer, the public might forever see him as a severely burned victim. The positive image he had spent years creating could be destroyed. Michael eventually compromised. The two sides agreed to settle the matter outside court. Pepsi paid Michael $1.5 million. He did not keep a single dollar. Michael signed documents transferring the entire amount directly to the Brotman Burn Center, the hospital that had treated him. On paper, the case was closed, but the people truly responsible had still not paid the price. Who was truly responsible? Initial media reports focused on a failure within the pyrotechnic system. However, witnesses who were present that day later revealed a different story. According to them, the greatest responsibility belonged to one specific person, director Bob Giraldi. Miko Brando, a close friend of Michael, and a firefighter named Donald, who was present at the scene, provided similar accounts. During the sixth take, Giraldi wanted a more dramatic camera shot. He approached Michael and personally instructed him to move more slowly. He told Michael to remain at the top of the staircase for several seconds longer than he had during the previous takes. That decision proved devastating. Michael's new position placed him directly beneath the pyrotechnic equipment. The negligence came from Giraldi's failure to inform the technical crew and fire safety team that the timing of Michael's movements had changed. The technician responsible for activating the fireworks followed the original timing. The explosion was fired directly toward a performer who was still standing in place. But the most disturbing part of the story went beyond carelessness. Steve Howell, who was involved with the filming that day, later described something even more disturbing. When the original footage was reviewed, a camera positioned at a hidden angle had accidentally captured Giraldi's face at the exact moment the fire erupted. He stood completely still. He did not shout for the cameras to stop. He did not rush toward Michael. The director simply watched in silence as the flames consumed the scalp of the artist standing in front of him. After the accident became public, Giraldi's legal representatives began a campaign to shift the blame. They told the press that the fire had spread so violently because Michael had used too much hairspray containing flammable chemicals. The explanation was almost absurd. Every fire requires an external source of heat. Regardless of which products had been used on Michael's hair, the fireworks remained the direct cause of the flames that burned his skin. The attempt by a powerful director to blame the victim's beauty products severely damaged Michael's ability to trust those around him. From that day forward, Michael Jackson ended all contact with Bob Giraldi. He never worked with the director again. The medical consequences and the beginning of a tragedy. The accident ended, but the wounds on Michael's head never truly healed. Skin destroyed by third-degree burns cannot repair itself naturally. The hair follicles in the affected area were completely dead. In April 1984, less than 3 months after the accident, Michael was forced to undergo surgery to reconstruct his scalp. Doctors used an extremely painful surgical procedure. They made a large incision in his scalp and inserted a device known as a silicone balloon beneath an area of healthy skin. Over time, liquid would gradually be pumped into the balloon. The expanding device would force the healthy skin to stretch and grow. Once enough new skin had been created, surgeons could remove the burned area and pull the expanded skin over the wound. The procedure turned every night into a medical nightmare for Michael. He lay in bed unable to sleep. In the silence, he could hear the silicone balloon slowly expanding beneath his scalp. He could feel his skin being stretched until it seemed ready to tear apart. Severe migraines began soon afterward. They were nothing like ordinary headaches. Michael described pain that felt as though individual nerves were being burned and tightened continuously. Before the accident, Michael Jackson was known for maintaining a disciplined and healthy lifestyle. He rejected illegal drugs, avoided stimulants, and followed a strict diet. but the physical pain exceeded what any ordinary person could endure. Sleep became impossible. Even basic physical movement brought suffering. Meanwhile, the pressure from the entertainment industry never slowed down. The Victory Tour had already sold out. Tens of millions of dollars were at stake. The machinery of the music business could not allow its most valuable performer to collapse. The first prescriptions for powerful sedatives were not given entirely to heal Michael's injuries. They became temporary solutions designed to force his body to continue functioning through the pain, ensuring that he could still walk onto the stage and keep the enormous money-making machine operating at full speed. That medical compromise opened the door to hell. To manage the pain from his surgeries, Michael turned to prescription painkillers. To sleep through the spasms and burning sensations in his nerves, he began taking sedatives. His body gradually developed a tolerance. The required doses became larger. A personal principle had been broken. Dependence on prescription medication began to form and eventually became deeply rooted in his nervous system over the following decades. Many medical experts later reviewed Michael's history and reached a similar conclusion. Michael Jackson's death in 2009 from an overdose of propofol was not an isolated event that appeared without warning. It was the final destination of a path that had begun in 1984. The fire on the Pepsi set was the starting point. It activated the ticking time bomb of pain medication that would eventually take the life of the king of pop. Chilling coincidences and an immortal legacy. When the timeline of this event is examined closely, the numbers reveal a coincidence that is almost impossible to ignore. The fire did not happen on an ordinary day. January 27, 1984, sits almost exactly at the midpoint of Michael Jackson's life. When the number of days between his birth and the accident is counted, the total is nearly identical to the number of days between the accident and his death. The strange symmetry resembles a butterfly effect. The fire created an almost perfect dividing line, separating the life of a legend into two distinct halves, one defined by light, the other shaped by darkness. But the darkness never completely consumed him. Michael Jackson's determination during the years after the accident revealed an extraordinary will to survive. Despite the unbearable pain and the surgeries that weakened his body, he refused to present himself as a victim. Only weeks after the accident, he appeared at the 1984 Grammy Awards and broke the existing record by taking home 8 awards in a single night. Guinness World Records also recognized him as the artist behind the best-selling album in history. The Victory Tour continued as scheduled. On stage, beneath the brilliant lights, Michael still performed the moonwalk with effortless precision. His voice remained powerful and clear. The audience saw a king ruling over his musical kingdom. They could not see the pain medication flowing through his body simply to keep him standing. His legacy also contained a bitter and tragic circle. The $1.5 million settlement from Pepsi was used to improve the Brotman Burns Center, giving thousands of other patients a better chance of survival. The cruel irony was that the same treatment center Michael had helped fund later became a place he reportedly returned to repeatedly, sometimes concealing his identity while seeking treatment for complications that never disappeared. The 1984 Pepsi accident remains one of the darkest chapters in the history of the entertainment industry. It exposed the coldness of corporate power, it revealed the devastating price of fame, and it left permanent scars on both the body and the mind of one human being. That fire damaged Michael Jackson's health and helped open the path toward the tragedy that ended his life. But neither the flames nor the ruthless systems surrounding them could destroy his artistic spirit or his compassion for others. Michael Jackson lived, created, and gave everything he had. And when he left this world, he left as an immortal legend.